Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Fuse COVID-19 seminar on this fine December day with the very intriguing title, Culture, Complexity, Collaboration and Courgettes. And that hopefully all becomes more clear towards the end of this seminar. We've got a great lineup of speakers for you to look at sort of the complexities of cross-sector collaborative responses to COVID-19, sort of reflecting on the experience, particularly in Gateshead around the community hubs. And we're hoping to see an interesting meeting. We also welcome you to tweet during the meeting. There's a hashtag, Fuse CSS for COVID seminar series, and feel free to use that in your communications about this seminar. Next slide, please. So my name is Peter Vendergraaf. I'll be hosting and chairing this seminar. I'm based at Teesside and co-lead the translational research program with Mandy Cheatham, one of the speakers today. And my role is to introduce you to them and set a few rules of engagement. And the first one is please leave your microphone on mute. And many of you have done it already. That's much appreciated. That helps sort of with the background noise, particularly when the speakers are speaking. Please also stop sharing your own video at this stage. It helps with the video quality, and then hopefully it would be great if you can turn it back on again when we get to the Q&A so we can see who we're talking to when we're having the discussion. Feel free to post any questions in the chat during the presentations. That will inform sort of discussion during the Q&A, and I will try to bring those in and put those towards the speakers at the last bit of this seminar. If you want to speak, feel free to put a question mark in the chat, and that's a sign that we can pick you up and bring you into the discussion, or raise your hand on the participant sidebar. If you've got any concerns during the seminar, please contact Ruth Wilson, and she will deal with that very effectively. And this seems to be normal. Please can I remind you to be professional during the seminar, be kind and respectful of each other's views and opinions, and let's have a great discussion. Next slide, please. So what we've got in store for you today, after I'll stop talking in a minute with my housekeeping, we've got 4 great speakers. First of all, Sarah Gorman, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Edwards House, who is part of the partnership in Gateshead, and tell you a lot more about that community organisations and what they do and how they're involved. Next will be up Fiona Pollard, who's the Community Development Worker at Edwards House and closely involved in this and share more experiences from her role. Followed by Mandy Cheatham, who is now a research fellow in the ARC for the North East and North Cumbria, and also co-leads a translational research program, and who's been involved in as an embedded researcher and share some of her reflections on that work. And then last but not least, Stephen Ward, who's the East Area Coordinator for Gateshead Council, also a very active partner in that hub, to share his perspective and experiences. So a great selection of different speakers to give you a well-rounded view on those experiences. And then we'll open the floor up to you to ask us questions about those presentations and anything that might come up in the discussion. And then we will end at 1:15 to send you all back in and hopefully have some lunch. Next slide, please. So at this stage, I will hand over to Sarah Gorman, our first speaker. Each speaker will speak for 15 minutes and we'll take the questions after that. Thank you very much. Sarah, your platform.
Peter, I think it's actually me.
Oh, is it Stephen? So did I get the order wrong?
It's I. We frequently get mistaken for each other. So you're not the first person, so don't worry.
Apologies. We're a very dynamic meeting, so it's already changed. So sorry, Stephen, go for it.
Don't worry. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Ward. I'm the area coordinator for the Easter Gateshead. For those who don't know Gateshead, it sits opposite our friends in Newcastle. The Easter Gateshead consists of 5 wards. And in terms of those 5 wards, they all sit within the top 20% of the index of multiple deprivation. Next slide, please. So in terms of partnerships and collaboration, I think, first of all, I think it's necessary to say that Sarah.
Stephen, but you're on mute again, I'm afraid. We lost you there for a second. Would you mind unmuting?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Thank you. Yeah, we can hear back again. Thank you.
So in terms of partnership and collaboration, I think it's fair to say and right to say that Sarah and I have worked together for over 10 years. So the work that we've done through COVID is the outcome of those 10 years worth of work. At the beginning, the partnership and collaboration was literally was literally Sarah and I. And we focused on the creation and the development of the picture in the middle of the slide there, which is Edward's house, which was a building that was previously belonged to the council, and I was responsible for it. And once we'd got an asset transfer out the way, we continued our partnership and collaboration work. We've now got 3 community spaces, which includes the one on the right-hand side, which Fiona will talk about in a short while, which is Larkspur House. But we've also created 20 social prescribing community link worker posts across the borough, who are all working and based within GP practices. So therefore the partnership and collaboration's kind of grown over 10 years. So therefore at the beginning it was Sarah and I. Now, and I've got a quick list, it includes education, social services, schools, public health, housing, council tax, children's services, just to name a few. And some of our prominent supporters include Alice Wiseman, our Public Health Director, and Sheena Ramsey, our Chief Executive, who both see the work that we do as part of the Council's Thrive agenda. Next slide, please. So through our work prior to working together, Sarah and I have recognised that people are complex, and there's nothing surprising about that. However, through our work together, we knew that we had the opportunity to try and overcome the challenges of complexity through place and through connectivity. So this slide is a slide that Sarah and I put together a while ago, and it shows just one resident who we've been working with. And what we did was we put together some analysis of the organisations who were attempting to work with a family, albeit a very complex one. And we mapped out 63 different professionals who were working or who had attempted to work with the individuals. And obviously this situation is complicated further by the world of austerity. Next slide, please. So prior to lockdown started, Sarah and I were working on project number 3, which is Beacon Loft, or BLE. And we'd been working with a group of residents in developing a piece of work. And the reason why we were working there was because of a variety of information sources. So our friends in the police were telling us about the huge amount of calls they were starting to receive. The fire service were being targeted by young people when on the estate. We knew that antisocial behaviour had got to the highest across the borough, and local councillors were expressing concerns expressed by residents that there were issues of concern and that we needed to intervene. So in terms of what we did next, we created a partnership piece of work, also known as a World Cafe, where I took on the major responsibility of making people cups of tea, which enabled me to have conversations with lots of different people. However, what we did at the end of that is, rather than tell everybody that we weren't going to be able to do anything, what we wanted to do was to sit with a group of people and work together and to see what we could do together. So there was no promises made other than sitting down and having a conversation about what it is that people wanted and what we could do together. And as part of that learning process, we visited Sarah's projects. And so therefore, whilst we chose Beacon Loft at the beginning, in terms of doing some consultation work, the actual community work was chosen by Beacon Loft, which is a really important point. And at that point, that's when we started to do our further development work. Next slide, please. So based on the collaboration work that we'd start with residents, we therefore started to form a collaborative with partners. And on the slide, you can see a selection of some of those people, which are a mixture of voluntary sector, community sector, public services, with the residents at the heart of that process. What quickly followed was a 94-page partnership lottery bid, where holidays and weekends were sacrificed, and the residents worked with us in putting it together, which was successful. And therefore, what we were able to do in the short term was to create another space, which is Larkspur House, which Fiona will talk about soon. And then soon after that, the world of COVID came along. However, irrespective of COVID, the partnership was aiming to break down service barriers, to promote collaboration and create connectivity. So therefore, it's about a new way of talking as rather than a better way of working. Next slide, please. So in many respects, the way Sarah and I describe it is kind of epitomized in this slide. So therefore, we talk about a department store experience. So there it's about where spaces are connected together. So in our example, we're looking at services. So therefore, what does that mean? Well, that means that actually it gives people an easier experience. It helps people to overcome the difficulties and challenges of actually talking about their issues. It's about bringing people together to talk collaboratively. And therefore, it's about making sure that that services are not independent, but are interconnected. And therefore, the experience in the short term is easier and quicker and more effective for residents. But ultimately, it becomes cheaper and more effective in the long term and sustainable. And I think it's over to Fiona now, I think.
Thanks, Stephen. Thrive in Beaconlough East went through approximately 2 years of planning, consultation, hours and hours of relationship building to get to the point when the doors of the newest Edwards House edition, Larkspur House, could open. Larkspur House opened on the 4th of September 2019 when Sarah and I landed at the room kindly provided by Larkspur Primary School. Very little apart from some random bits of donated furniture, and this room was to become Larkspur House. Sarah said to me something on the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, go out and chat to folk, find people who'd like to help and put on some fun stuff, all with a view to build happier, healthier, friendlier communities. In the first 3 weeks, I can remember thinking, what have I got myself into? There's a lot of standing on the schoolyards, catching up for waiting for a child, hanging around the local shops, and boldly chatting to people wandering around on the estate. The first interactions I had with residents were met with caution and for the odd route to cynicism. A crafted NAT group tentatively requested to use the space as of week 3. And people started to interact on the schoolyard and show curiosity and interest. And I can remember one man saying, I'll get involved if other blokes do. The school staff were really enthusiastic and welcoming, and one of the locals was happy to do a guided tour of the estate and introduce me to a selection of people while we navigated the nooks and crannies of Beaconlough East, which is a bit of a rabbit warren of houses. Every interaction was proven to be full of rich personal anecdotes, sketching history of life on Beaconlough East. Early on, it was realised that to do the work justice, these interactions needed to be captured through journaling and logging, knowing that embedded researcher, Mandy Cheatham, who will be speaking next, would be joining in the day-to-day life to support the data collection. Relationships were starting to develop within the partnership and the community. The community tentatively started to pop in for a cup of tea and join the vast selection of biscuits on offer. And various people from the partnership would pop by for a chat to meet people and to just get stuck in. The room was warm and it was beginning to take on a sense of homeliness as people started to take ownership of the space. We organised a family fun day roughly 6 weeks after opening. And one local person said, you'll be lucky if 20 people show. And we had around 300 people showed up. And the tombola sold out within 25 minutes. The police showed up with a riot van and the police dogs. The fire service showed up with a fire engine. The feedback was amazing. And there was loads of positive engagement. Larkspur House continued to grow and develop, and before long, a whole week-long programme of events was operating successfully, supported by the youth and community worker, a sports and leisure coach from Gateshead Council who'd been seconded part-time to help out, the local estate manager through Gateshead Housing Company, the local children's centre, and a band of enthusiastic volunteers. The weekly timetable ran multiple activities throughout each day, Monday to Friday, including evening sessions for those who were working. From listening to local people and what they wanted to see happening, we had various activities for adults, which included women's wellbeing, Zumba, card making, crafts, housing company drop-in, police drop-in. We had some activities running at the supported accommodation on the estate. We had an African drumming night, some craft and natter, men's group circuit training, just loads of different things. And in amongst these regular sessions, we also had additional sessions and also included one-to-one counselling, just basically responding to the needs of the community. We also interacted children's activities. And by March 2020, on average, there were approximately 30 to 40 people involved at Larkspur House daily, and the appetite was continuing to grow. Next slide, please.
I'm really sorry, Fiona. This is slightly. I can hear a crackling on the line. Maybe your microphone is rubbing against something. Would you mind slightly moving it? I'm not sure if it's just me, but there's a bit of a crackling on the line. Sorry.
No worries. Hopefully that'll help.
Thank you.
No worries. At the start of April, approximately 6 months after opening Larkspur House, we had to close the doors, much to the disappointment of the community. The UK was going into lockdown as COVID-19 moved through Europe and was gaining momentum in the UK. As a charity, we posted out flyers on Facebook and through people's doors to offer support. We thought we'd just deal with the requests as they came through. We didn't have a massive plan at that point. After a couple of weeks, Gateshead Council had mobilised 8 shielding hubs across the borough in response to the crisis. Edbert's House partnered with Gateshead Council to operate what was Larkspur Hub and later became the East Area Support Team. Our team over time consisted of a real mix of people from sport and leisure, Gateshead Libraries, public health, our area coordinator from neighbourhood management, and our researcher from the university. A regular request through the pandemic has been for emergency food, families whose lives have changed exponentially. Parents who were made redundant or furloughed at 80%, who had never claimed benefits a day in their life, found that they were relying on weekly emergency food parcels, unable to afford toilet roll. Often through caring conversation, although the request for food was the catalyst, we often found a whole tranche of additional needs sitting behind the food request. A man who'd become self-employed as a builder in the new year found he fell through the gap of any government financial support. He'd given notice on his flat and was stuck, unable to pay the rest of his deposit on his new flat because he had to stay at home and use his savings, not allowed to work. These challenging situations called for creative solutions and perseverance. The cases were coming through rapidly. The emergency need was being dealt with there and then by the team, but the background works of complex referrals, grant applications, benefit checks, etc. was huge. The aim of the team was to provide a level of support that would help families to stabilise and rediscover their independence. As cases arrived, the team had a chat about the various avenues of support available, discussed these with the individuals and supported them to navigate their challenging situation. The team willingly shared their personal and professional networks. Over time, one of the walls in Larkspur House was covered in helpful contacts and cheats to navigate some of the tricky systems. A selection of services soon became our regular go-tos, such as Age UK, Citizens Advice Gateshead, Council Tax, DWP, North East Counselling Services, all of whom we had named contacts who were willing to go above and beyond to support the local residents, such as Ian, Alison, Shelley and Karen, Alex, Shirley, Charlotte and Donna, Marge and Alistair. Although they weren't physically in the hub space, they became a vital part of the team and continue to be so. Alongside us throughout, we've had access to our Edbert's House community link workers who are based in every GP practice in the borough, a vital lifeline supporting us with our complex cases. Many people who approach the hub for support often apologise for needing support and are embarrassed about their situation. Each person in the team is committed to providing the best possible experience and recognises the importance of true connection at a time when we are being told to keep our distance. Next slide, please. The partnership between Edbert's House and Gateshead Council proved to be really positive from day one, although not without challenges. The multi-skill and combined knowledge and networks of the team and the agile nature of the partnership meant that simple things like access to a minibus for deliveries, mobile phones, cash and credit card were easily resolved through Edbert's House. The council created a customer relations management system to manage the ever-growing demand for help and support and provided a huge number of food parcels and delivery drivers. Edbert's House managed to secure some funding to help to provide financial relief to families through topping up utilities, providing bus passes to those struggling to get to work, purchasing white goods and small electrical items, helping out with school uniforms, clothing, etc. This fund allowed the team to be able to offer a really practical response and help to further grow the trust in the relationships. An additional bonus as a result of being embedded in a community has been the overwhelming support of volunteers and generous local shopkeepers. Larkspur House volunteers organised approximately 400 Easter craft bags to go to families in need, things to decorate their windows and entertain children being homeschooled. A local book charity donated hundreds of books to be added to food parcels. A mutual aid volunteer who usually ran a pub regularly collected donations from the local Morrisons to add to the food parcels. 2 young lads donated 200 Easter eggs. A local family donated fresh fruit and veg. A local shopkeeper donated non-perishable goods and any other requests we made, all alongside what seemed the endless stream of courgettes and limes being offered by local businesses who would usually provide for the now closed restaurants and food services. Larkspur House volunteers, alongside local councillors, local church and mutual aid volunteers, Edberts House board members and school lunch supervisors, delivered thousands of free school meals to the homes of local school children in East Gateshead, meals provided by the council and various local sports clubs all pulling together. Repeatedly, we have seen the kindness and generosity of Gateshead residents being part of a wonderful wider support network. As a result of pulling together, the East Area team, with the help of many others, have supported in excess of 2,000 families, often on numerous occasions over the last 8 months. The team have spent time talking with families in various states of crisis, families who have lost loved ones who they were unable to see or cuddle, and people struggling with loneliness. The team have had the privilege of walking alongside people and cannot wait to reopen our doors and welcome these new families into the 3 Edberts House community houses across East Gateshead and continue to work in our communities in our post-COVID world. And I think it's over to Mandy.
Thanks, Fiona. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research. Next slide, please, Sarah, which originally was commissioned by Gateshead Council and set out to try and understand how community-centred approaches improve community wellbeing. But obviously this was slightly derailed in light of COVID. And I'm going to talk a bit about the research that I did from September 2019, so a little bit before COVID and then during lockdown. So it was, and it's important to say, the embedded research really massively contributed to my understanding. And I know people talk about embedded research in different ways, so I thought it might just be helpful to explain my kind of understanding. I really like the McGinnity and Salakangas definition of embedded research, which is individuals that are either university-based or employed with the purpose of implementing a collaborative, jointly owned research agenda in a host organisation in a mutually beneficial relationship. And that feels really important, that mutual benefit. So I'd worked in other of the Edberts House projects in previous incarnations. I'd done work in Pattinson House, and I'd also done some work drawing on the work about child poverty, and the universal credit work grew out of that collaboration. For this presentation, I'm really going to have to focus in on the interviews with community members that were done pre-COVID, and then a little snapshot of the findings from the stakeholder interviews. But the important thing to say, I think, is what a privilege for me it has been to both see and be part of the action and the changes over time by being co-located. And I've learned a lot, as well as hopefully contributing something. So next slide, Sarah, thanks. Community members that I spoke to, it feels important to understand the pre-COVID context in this area. So both Stephen and Fiona have given you a flavour of that. It's a very diverse community and it faces significant challenges. And you get a flavour of the sense that people didn't feel like they had an enormous amount of power and control well before COVID. And Marmot reminds us about the importance of control over decision making. And what I saw and felt in Larkspur House was a positive, welcoming space that people could come to, where their priorities were taken seriously and where their ideas and thoughts really helped to shape a programme of activities and changes. So that trusted organisation in the heart of the estate, attached to a primary school, as Fiona said, really magnified the opportunities for and possibilities for mutual gain and helped to address the kind of community's priorities. And what Fiona didn't really talk about so much were the committed and non-judgmental staff who were really at the heart of that response. So people were connected to each other, but also to respectful services. And that involves staff actually going out to meet community members where they felt safe in their patch. So as the third quote says, learning to listen to people, reaching out to people in different ways. And that kind of wider knock-on effect of realizing, connecting people together and people realizing that actually they're not as different from each other as they might think, also helped to improve community cohesion. And the amazing voluntary activity that I saw unfolding, it started before COVID, but actually it massively sped up during COVID, where people moved from that position potentially of being seen as a service user very much to contributed to the COVID response. And Fiona has outlined some of those amazing people. But it was because of the opportunities and the relationships that had been built pre-COVID, I think, that people were able to step up in the way that they were. Next slide, Sarah, thanks. So the stakeholder interviews were obviously, they were undertaken in June and July. So they reflect on some of the work underway, both before lockdown and some of the things that helped, but also the changes that have happened since. And I think one of the significant things that people talked about was having an understanding that when you've got people doing the work on the estate that live on the estate, that's better for the estate. So that didn't just apply to volunteers, that also applied to paid staff and some very senior members of both the partnership and the team based at Larkspur House, who really had both experience of growing up in the area or in areas like it, and understood and I think felt a real investment in improving it. So pre-COVID, there was a real impetus, I think, a momentum, if you like, to create solutions that people wanted to see. So whether they were relating to housing, to the park, which had been vandalised, to the setting up of a community garden, or to address some of the crime and antisocial behaviour that Stephen described, all of those ingredients were in place. So they were actually ready to roll. And I think it's important to talk about the building blocks that, again, enabled those responses to take place and enabled people to start to feel more in control. So there's a quote here: if you give people the right space, place, responsibility and opportunity, then they flourish. It's about the trust, the belief, the love, the care, the friendship, all of those things. And I think the final quote also, it gives you a bit of insight into the changes that had happened for local authority staff. So people had been far more fluid around control because they'd had to be. A very honest admission, we cared less about our own budgets and empires and more about the purpose. And that purpose included, for example, really practical responses. So people were already starting to question what they were doing, how they were working, the partnership approaches. And I think there's some really interesting questions about what and how we're going to maintain and sustain some of those wider changes. There's an interesting Carnegie Trust report that Pippa Coots has written called Pooling Together that identifies some evidence that maybe things are going back to the way that they were pre-COVID. But I think what has definitely happened is people have questioned the assumptions that underpinned some of the accepted givens. So I guess that's a positive in and of itself. Next slide, please. So just before I hand over to Sarah, I just wanted to share with you a model that Jane South and colleagues have produced, which is a kind of whole system approach to COVID recovery. So it's got the 11 elements that you can see coloured in the coloured circles, and some what feel like very important principles, which I hope you can read, including a kind of complex systems approach, which I think is really helpful and feels very relevant to the work in Beaconlough East, because it kind of views local authorities and partnerships not just as single uniform entities, if you like, but as social systems with both internal and external influences. And Harry Rutter talks about these. Penny Hoare also talks about workplaces. She conceptualizes them as complex, dynamic ecological systems of interacting activity, social networks and feedback loops. So for me, embedded research then is ideally suited to an understanding of those contextual factors which actually help us understand how things are implemented and how we can affect change through either research or practice that I think would be very difficult to gather in other ways. And the trust, power and relationship circles in the middle where you can also see values, also feel really fundamental. And I think, again, in public health, we need to be much better at recognising the importance and talking about the importance of values and principles, and also the amount of time that it takes to build trusting relationships, and with some discussion of the kind of power influences at both local and national level. So I think particularly for and with communities that have been really battered and beaten by the effects of austerity, and now by the additional effects of COVID, we need to have really robust relationships in place with community members through VCS organisations like Edwards House and Larkspur House, who have those links and connections. And active communities are only, I think, enabled when we have a thriving VCS and relationships as academics with those both in local government and VCS organisations. So I think that for me, there are questions about not just how we develop and maintain those relationships with policy and practice partners, but there are also questions about impact, how we measure impact, and some questions about how we approach research as academics. So I think, we need to start thinking more widely about our definitions of impact, which incorporate social change, and recognise that those implications, if we're going to do this differently in the future, have as much relevance and as many messages for us in academia as they do for our colleagues in local government and VCS organisations. So I'm going to hand back over to Sarah, and then I'm going to reappear at the end and talk about reflections and learning. So back to Sarah, thanks.
Thanks, Mandy. Now I'm trying to move the slides on. Failing, brilliant. Yes, thank you. My name's Sarah. I'm the Chief Exec of Edwards and responsible for our community houses and our social prescribing work. Just want to share some thoughts around culture, complexity and collaboration, and lots of these things have been mentioned before. But one of the things that our culture really values is connection, and many places in the Northeast now that were connecting places have disappeared. So places such as social clubs, that mining and shipbuilding and other things had a strong sense of identity, faith groups, pubs even in our communities have closed, and people are struggling for connection, and connection is what gives us that sense of self-worth. So actually I often, if you want to describe yourself, you can only describe yourself in terms of the connections that you have with others. So maybe I am a wife, I am a mother, I am a charity worker. If those connections are removed, then actually that's a real problem for people, and it's almost hard even to define it yourself. So we're talking to people on our estates and saying, well, I'm nothing because actually my children have been removed, my partner has left me, I've never had a job. Actually, these things really erode our sense of self. And so building places again of connections in our areas that are struggling the most are absolutely vital. And I think that stood us in good stead when it came to COVID. I think the reflection from COVID is actually that if you have those spaces in place already, then you can act very quickly because you have those networks of trust. If we can create connecting places that are full of love and happiness and laughter, they're not necessarily places that people just go to when they're in crisis. They're building relationships much further upstream than that. And if we can create that sense of connection, then actually we're able then to work with people much more effectively. Our culture at Edwards as well also values creativity and emergence. So we haven't got a blame culture, we have a learning culture. We want to explore ideas together and see what works. Often things emerge, some things don't work, and that's fine. We found that actually when we started to work with other agencies, and particularly in COVID, this is very useful because obviously we're used to working in this way where we explore stuff together, we co-produce ideas, people get involved in all sorts of pieces of work that maybe that they wouldn't necessarily have experience of, but that's a really exciting thing. We noticed with some of our colleagues when we first started to partner that some of that was quite new to some of them. Maybe in larger institutions, people are very used to being in quite a rigid role and used to being told what to do, rather than in a sense letting their own ideas emerge. I wanted to play a video. We've been working with Alice Wiseman at Public Health around community engagement. There's been lots of behavioural insights work done, but actually then what do we do with that information? How do we develop that? So we took that information back to our team, the fact that there was a low level of compliance in certain communities. How could we actually work creatively to get some of that messaging out? And the team have responded really well to that. Just wanted to share one of the films that we have created, which I'm going to have to stop sharing and we'll look at on YouTube.
I think at this point, Mark Welford is sharing his screen so we can look at the YouTube videos. We had some apologies, we had some technical issues with the embedded videos in the presentations, so we're doing it a bit more old school. Thank you, Mark. I can't hear any sound, I'm afraid.
I can't either. If you stop sharing, Mark, we'll leave.
I was going to say that it will maybe affect it a little bit because some of the things might be sold out because people might want to get them first before it's all gone. And also some shops are going to be closing as well because of COVID. If the parents get the presents just in time for Christmas, like, but then it won't be spoiled and then we won't need to go out. But there is some people who have lost their jobs, so they can't really get any presents for their kids because they have no money because they lost their job. That's why I've got some toys that I don't play with, and I'm going to give them to the people who have need them. Like having a good Christmas party. Like you could do the same, but like just with your family, or you could like video chat your family on your phone, and then you could like open them like it's together, but you're not actually together. What you do, you just stay with family, like be safe, even though you're not allowed out. Just call friends or family, and then just FaceTime them so you can see what they look like. Try to help them keep safe and like have a good time. Like be happy with the families around you and make it like good with the people you are with. Maybe he has to wear like one of those science suits that scientists wear, but like have like Santa Claus on top of it. So he could like come in and he will like sometimes wear a visor or a mask.
Thank you. So again, this piece will link to links to a list of how to have a safe Christmas. We could have just put out a list of how to have a safe Christmas, but by doing this and when we're engaging with the children, it will be shared by parents, it will be shared by families, and we start to be able to get the message out in a very different way. One of our other values is around community leadership. So you will have seen from our previous organisational diagram that we have community steering groups that are in the lead of our work, who make decisions over budgets and so on. We've tried to adopt the same process with our COVID comms, because actually we need to be using messengers in our community that local people will respect and listen to. Actually, people hearing their own voice and taking some control in that process is really vital. So to really work on the compliance of young people and those under 30, then we said we need a different messenger. They are not going to necessarily listen to the leader of the council, but actually they will listen to a messenger who they would listen and share. So we've been working with Makina MC called MC Tazo, who wrote us this piece who you're going to see now.
I've got a message stage, you're serious morning, it'll only take a few minutes. The subject, COVID-19, this virus has no limits. So listen, close your attention, cause I'm about to start. I'm giving you some advice, take this in and be smart. First of all, wake up, this virus is very real. It's no real deal, surreal, so please have my appeal. Yeah, I used to have a doubt of what it was all about. Now I know friends who've had it, so be careful when you go out. Face masks are compulsory, up and down the country. Something to say, I'm afraid this is a new reality, so please get realizing instead of despising me, you, everyone. We should be sanitizing. It's the law. I know it's evolving, it's becoming norm. Trap and chase masks on your face, I'm sorry to inform. Now I know it's asking a lot, but please don't lose the plot. The good times will return. Don't tell me you forgot. These crazy times, strange times, I know we'll come back stronger. Let's work together. Wherever stop this going on longer. Now I do admit it's not judgment. We need to be more wiser. Stay safe. Think of others. That's what I do advisor. So now you've heard my final word. It's time to act. Instructions, guidelines, follow the rules everyone. Fact, I've got your ear. Break the fear. Sick and eliminate tear. It's up to you now. Let's make these lockdowns disappear. We can make these lockdowns disappear. Please do your bit. Let's get rid of it. Competition time. Calling all you MCs out there. Who thinks they can do better than what they've just seen? For a chance to win £100 and have the competition on screen. 3, 2, 1, Tassel's gone.
Again, giving a completely different voice to the COVID messaging. You are forgiven if you're under 30 for maybe not understanding anything that he said, which is a lot of public health professionals have said to me. But this messaging is really powerful for young people, and we're hoping that some of the competition entries will be able to produce into new COVID messaging. I'll just flick through here. And both of these things are about control. We've already heard about the importance of control in terms of people's health and well-being. And during COVID, there has been so much messaging that has come down from on high, being told to do stuff, being done to. And we know that that's really important, that people have a sense of control in the process that's going on. And the more that we can use local messengers, children, MCs, whoever it might be, giving people a sense of a voice and ownership in that process, not only will improve their own well-being, but I believe will also help to reduce our infection rates. We already know the long-term evidence from Marmot's work around this that we have really based our work upon. And one of the vital things around that is being able to provide relationships in the community. Lots of services provide intervention. All of these things are good. Intervention, transaction, relationship are all good in their own way, but often services focus on intervention and transaction, where actually if we can build connection and relationship across our communities, then that is the bedrock actually of all the other work that's done, the trust, the sense of belonging and acceptance. So when crises hit, that is already there. That relationship is already existing. Just to finish with some thoughts around collaboration, because as Stephen mentioned at the beginning, he and I have worked together for a long time. I asked him what his reflection were on collaboration, and he said basically that working with me required patience, and more patience. And I'm sure that's actually true. But I do think there's a real, if we're going to really form effective partnership working, then it requires a degree of honesty. It requires some difficult conversations. We've laughed together and cried together, but I think also there's a degree of compromise and challenge involved. So when two organisations are coming together with different cultures and different ways of doing things, then again, there's an exploration of what is actually our core values. What can we compromise? Where can we come together? And actually, where is it that we draw the line? Because actually some of our values sit quite differently. How can we bring them together? How can we work together? And ultimately, it requires a commitment to an overarching sense of vision about where we are going and what we are trying to do. Bringing people together around partnership agreements or policies and procedures, it is all very well, but they will only go so far. And actually, there's something about that powerful sense of coming together around an overarching vision of what we're trying to accomplish in our communities that is really vital. Somebody said to me once that actually Edwards is something that you feel. And I really like that, because I think when we're talking about health and well-being, we must we cannot forget emotions. Our emotions will always be involved. We will love people, we will care about people, we will grow attached to them, and also to one another. And how we navigate those emotions and bring those in to really enhance our work is really vital. I'm just going to hand back to Mandy, who's going to just have some final reflections.
Thanks, Sarah. And you've beautifully...
Mandy, can I ask you to be quite quick and concise, so we have a bit of time for discussion?
Yeah, I'm not. I promise, I'm not going to say very much. I think Sarah's really covered it all. The only thing that I really want to say is that one of the things that has made this, for me, such an amazing and valuable experience is being co-located and understanding and feeling. Sarah talked about feeling, and the feeling that you have when you walk into Larkspur House is something that is actually really difficult to capture in words. And I have that challenge I had that challenge in writing the report. But I think a sense that feelings are welcome, and actually working together productively and co-productively will produce tensions. And in a way, if there aren't tensions, then you're doing it wrong. If you really are truly co-producing research and practice. And I have a colleague in another local authority who talks about constructive disruption. And I think sometimes our role as researchers is to prompt a bit of constructive disruption, and to recognise some of the emotional labour in sustaining and maintaining partnerships that include us as researchers, and we should be open to navigating some of those tensions constructively too. So that's all I'm going to say. It has been a privilege to work in partnership with Sarah, Stephen and Fiona, and yeah, they are an amazing team. So that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mandy, for those final remarks there. Thank you for keeping it close to time. That's much appreciated. Thank you for great speakers, for some really thought-provoking presentations.